Hey there everybody, thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today I'll be continuing on in my series of reviews of the Rust Belt Review, a comics anthology that's put together by Sean Knickerbocker that represents kind of a view of comics from the Rust Belt. So kind of like a regional anthology of cartoonists who grew up in an area, not necessarily still living there. Really enjoyed this anthology. Was gonna review them all at once, all five, but have found it so rich that I'm doing them individually. So I would encourage you to go back and watch the previous two and then come back and watch this and then hang around for the next 2 weeks, and there will be 2 more leading up to the fairly newly released, by the time these videos come out, issue number 5. And hopefully there will be a whole bunch more because these are fantastic. So we get a little intro editorial here from Sean Knickerbocker to open up the issue. That's always nice. He gives a shout out to MS Harkness for coordinating efforts on a cartoonist retreat that a lot of these artists did together. So another name that I'm familiar with from previous issues of this, and just enjoying her work and seeing that she was organizing something for this group and is involved in this is pretty cool. It just seems like a really good, fun-friendly group that's really committed to making high-quality comics together. So go ahead and take a look at what's in this issue. Right out the gate, we get one of many little 1- or 2-page Andrew White comics, which was really exciting. Anyone who's been following the channel for a while knows I'm a huge fan of Andrew White. You know, one of these people that was one of the first people that I stumbled into on this channel that kind of opened my eyes up to how rich the indie small press publishing scene really still is, and how much diversity of great stuff there is. So it's cool to see Andrew White taking part in this group. Then we get back to part 3 of Audra Stang's Tunnel Vision. By the way, I haven't mentioned this on previous videos, but I love this about this. I wish all anthologies did this. Put the artist's name, I don't care about the title of the piece, but put the artist's name on the bottom of the pages on every page. That's a genius idea. I think everyone should be doing that. It's so frustrating to be like flipping back and forth. There's bios in the back of this, links to Instagrams and stuff like that, but it's really nice while you're reading to be able to, who is this? Is really good. Oh, Audra Stang, and not have to do any flipping. And it just immediately, like before you get caught up in the next cool thing, go make sure that you're following that artist. You see what kind of work what else they have, you know. I think anthologies really, beyond being something like a soundtrack where an artist can really kind of try something outside of their norm, which is like how I like to use anthologies, try something new stylistically. I think they're a great place for people to get exposed, and I think that's part of what Sean Knickerbocker is doing, and very intentional with that. So I appreciate that. I wish all anthologies did that. I know some people are probably doing the opposite just to be subversive, but I really prefer that. Here we have a piece by Michael Sweater, who I've done some reviews on. Really enjoy his stuff. So I'm starting to see also that Sean Knickerbocker's tastes just kind of line up with mine, right? Like he's got a bunch of people that I have found in the last couple years, and he's bringing them together in a book. So I'm like kind of jealous of that, you know. That's something I would like to do eventually through Living the Line, is do some kind of anthology thing, just because part of the fun of this whole thing is just finding things that you like and sharing them with people. So this is really cool. So to see Andrew White, to see Michael Sweater, that's just all really fun to have in this book. This Michael Sweater story is about some characters who got drunk and got tattoos, and then going back, and he's like, wow, cool tat, who did that? You did it, damn, that rocks. And then, what makes you think it was a good idea to tattoo a drunk person? Well, the customer's always right, sir. So just that kind of, you know, fun Michael Sweater stuff. This is one of his more adult ones, which is his mode that I prefer. The kids' books are cool, but just not so much for me. This is a Soggy Landing, is a very wild story by Ian Densford and the brothers McGovern. I don't know who wrote and who drew, but it's kind of about cannibalism and someone going crazy. So just this here of like this hearth calling this guy and turning him into a crazy lustful wolf character. Just really kind of gross art, but the combination of the ink line and the penciling, and I really like the look of it. I really like the way that the values are used in here. It would be cool if this could be adjusted so the black was like black and then the grays stayed, but we'll get to kind of some reasons for that in a second. This is a piece by another new contributor, Jordan Speicher-Willis. It's about rancid and rotten versus the school lunch. So you have these two characters here. This is rancid and this is rotten. And they're kind of like want to provide free lunch for everyone at school. And they do like a little heist or something to make that happen. So that one's just kind of funny. But again, all of these, one of the things I enjoy about these is even the wilder stories like this one here, getting more psychedelic and fantastical. The majority of these stories, or you have like Michael Sweater, you know, working with kind of animal-looking, anthropomorphic animal-looking characters, they're really all still very grounded. There's not like a lot of sci-fi or genre stuff in here, really. They're all very grounded stories. Even like this one, when they get a little bit strange, there's still something like, you know, worrying about school lunch, this guy who's the principal has just got divorced, you know, looking at people's breasts, things like that. So I really, really like that about the stories in here. I keep saying it, it's the type of stories I wish I was good enough to write that way, and it's the type of stories that I really want to be reading. Then another kind of favorite of mine from the last few years who's in this book as well is Alex Nall. So really enjoy that. I think Alex Nall, along with Sean Knickerbocker, are probably some of my favorite just like writers in terms of character dialogue driven writing that I've found. Alex Nall is also quickly developing as a cartoonist in all of his works. I've seen his cartooning chops are coming along very good. When I was reviewing Sean Knickerbocker's work, Killbuck, I was pointing out that I had some, like, I was unsure about when exactly, how old these artists are and what exactly time frames they're representing, because they are representing like small rural communities in the Rust Belt. It seems like is often the background that they're coming from. There's this real confusion about time. Like here we're looking at these people who work at a mall. We're looking at like a Walden Books and an Orange Julius. Now Orange Julius makes sense to me that it's still around, but I have a really hard time believing that there's still Walden Books at malls. I remember being really excited to go to the Walden Books when I was a kid, but it's really, really hard for me to imagine that there's still a Walden Books. Now they're talking about in the story that the store is about to close. So that makes a little bit more sense that maybe this is like something that the artist was aware was happening in like the mid-aughts, and they're constructed a character around memories of what the mall was like as a kid or something in the 2000s. I'm not sure, but it seems like for how young I assume these artists are, and having seen pictures and stuff of Alex Nall, knowing for a fact he's younger, it seems more like they're remembering my childhood, which seems strange. It seems like the world should have been different by then. So I don't know if that's just a representation of these kind of small dying communities that they're representing, where they still have a Walden's Books and it's about to close. This story is definitely about, you know, the problems of the mall. You get here just like some kind of advice as well that characters in these type of situations will be making, and this shows like the type of writer that I think Alex Nall is honey, if you've married someone as lazy as my husband, any man who will eagerly change a light bulb is a godsend. And then she says, I'll keep that in mind come my wedding day. So this woman who's running the bookstore that's about to fall apart, you know, she's older, she's lonesome, and all of that stuff. She's working at this store that's falling apart. She's working in a town that's falling apart, which is obviously a lot of these artists in the Rust Belt are talking from that perspective. And so she's going to call Monty in facilities and have him come change a light in her store. I'm not going to show any more of that story, but it's basically about her making a connection with that guy who will change her light bulb. And so those kind of like very quiet character-driven stories with a real like ear for clever but authentic but clever and literate type of dialogue, you know, like this. If you've been married to someone as lazy as my husband, any man who will eagerly change the light bulb is a godsend. Like, great line of dialogue, but it's also kind of believable. So that's just what Alex Nall does so great. And his Town and County book is phenomenal. in terms of like world building as well, and I'm curious how these stories fit into something like that, if eventually it's all part of the same thing or if that's different. I know Alex has done a bunch of books that I haven't got a hold of, so I'll have to get a bigger picture of his work, but everything I've seen so far I really like. Then this is really cool, is that Sean Knickerbocker does a how to print your own zines, and he says right out the gate, it's been a few years since I've seen anybody talk about the nuts and bolts of self-publishing, specifically printing, which is interesting because, you know, obviously that's a huge part of what we're talking about on the channel, and he's covered some of the same topics that we cover as well in terms of like the technical stuff that Sean's the wizard that he is. But also, you know, looking back at like Dave Sims' Guide to Self-Publishing and stuff like that, you do have to update those things because a lot of what Dave has said is completely irrelevant now, you know, like with scanners and all that kind of stuff is not something that you were getting in the 80s and 90s. So I think that's really cool that like Sean Knickerbocker really seems like he's doing this with a mission in mind, and I'm sympathetic to that because living the line is something that I do with a mission in mind, and Sean does with a mission in mind, and that mission is related to seeing better quality work, better reproduction of work, just growing the medium, not even so much the industry. Like, I don't care about the industry. I care about the medium and the artists doing the work and connecting artists to their readers. And that seems to be the kind of ethos that's driving this too, is like, get things put out there, get them put out there well, and get them to your customers. And that when you do make them yourself, when you really make them yourself, you don't have someone in China print them like we do, distributing things to the market. When you're doing it just down by yourself, you can have a book printed like this, mass market, and then take the time to go and tip something in like this. This had to be put in by hand. So I think that's really cool. And this is also really cool because this book is professionally printed. This is self-printed, and it says below is a handmade zine featuring art by Caleb Orecchio. This comic was printed on a Brother HL 2270 DW black and white laserjet printer on 20-pound white copy paper. So not only do you get another little comic in your collection of comics, but there's technical specifications of like, look, we did all of this, we printed with these materials, and this is what it looks like. This is what you can do by yourself. This is what you can do if you have professional resources. And I think that's cool that it's showing that, because this is artists that they're still making zines and stuff, but have leveled up to a higher level of production, but they're still kind of paying that knowledge that they've gained downstream to people who are just at this stage in their career. And I think that's amazing. And he's giving good advice here too that Sean from the Living the Line would agree with as well, talking about what programs to use. Gives a very clear example here of what Sean and I often complain about people printing their stuff as halftones, and how you get the fuzzy lines or the broken lines versus something that's a black and white line art only, like exported at 600 DPI only to bitmap with an off and on. It's either black or white line art. So that's cool. I would say it's a little surprising that looking at some of the work in here, it still does look like there's some halftone printing going on. Like looking at these lines here, I don't know if it's just the paper, but these do look like they are still constructed out of dots. So that's a bit strange to me that he did all that writing about it, but I still see the line work. You know, it's pretty well produced, but it does seem like even the black lines are constructed out of dots to me. That may be a problem of the printer, or it may be a limitation of the printing process. Like they may be doing a digital printing process instead of an offset litho. So you're still going to get the best results with the process he's describing, but if you're printing digitally, then it's probably still going to, it's going to be an inkjet that's going to print with dots. Whereas when you send it to an offset press, they can basically export it as a line at that point. So I'm not sure if that's what it is, but it's interesting, and it's cool that he's giving that advice But anyone who's watching this and wants way more in-depth kind of tutorials about what he's talking about here, Sean of Living the Line, we have a number of videos in our tech video section on the channel, and B, those videos have links to about 250, 300 pages of advice that Sean has written about buying scanners, what kind of programs should you use, what should you be doing to prepare your work. So we've also put that material out there in much greater depth and detail, and that's out there for free for people to access. So yeah, please use that. Like, make sure your work gets presented well. Then we flip over to part 3 of Sean Knickerbocker's Best of 3. We start to learn a little bit more about what's going on here, which is, if you remember, we have these characters who are living on this plot of land. Someone has come to try and get their house back. We also find out that this character's dad has supposedly died and left him a map to some money or something. And then in the previous episode, we get these 2 mob guys that we had kind of seen in the first episode show up, and this woman Shelly comes in too, stops the mob guys, takes the main characters away, and we learn that what she wants is that this character's dad, and again, sorry for spoilers, but it's like as I go through each one to talk about what's going on in this episode, I gotta talk about how the story expands. But in this one, we find out that his dad had stolen money from the mob, and they're coming to look for it, and this character wants some of it as well, but he doesn't know. He just got some money and blew it on some dumb shit like a sword. He doesn't know how much there was. So that story is starting to expand in scope, starting from a pretty limited on this property out in the woods to expanding to be kind of a multi-state story now. So that's getting more interesting and compelling, kind of like a Dave Lapham vibe to the writing there. Stray Bullets type of thing would be like the closest I could say in terms of the writing. Again, with the art, you can see what the art looks like, but Sammy Harcum comes to mind immediately on kind of how the characters are drawn. Then we go back to the conclusion of Will Dinski's The Eat Street Diners Club Find a Gun. Again, I don't know if there's more Eat Street Diners Club stuff. I'll have to look into that. It would be cool. It seems like a strange, funny comic, and I'd like to see what other adventures they get in. But if you remember from the previous review, we have this character here. I believe his name is Joe, and he had grabbed a gun because he saw a crime go down, and then he saw kids potentially getting a hold of guns. So he grabbed it, and then the cops saw him, and then the cops invaded his dining with his diners club, and so now he's running from the cops because the cops think he was the criminal that robbed a bank. And so you just get this cop like mad that he has to be dealing with this, and he's running, chasing this guy. Artists get in the way, and the cop winds up shooting some art, and it's basically just crashing everything and being useless. Here we get again the artists return, and I won't talk about the end of the story, but this is a strange little thing here where look, there's artists, stay back, no closer, we observe from a distance. And the artists are in this story, they're just always trying to like help or do stuff. Like, we can help, we will prepare shelter, thank you. These artists are helpful, probably grant money. And this we observe from a distance. There really is a sense, and I struggle with this a lot as an artist, where you really do question like your contribution to the world. Obviously there's been so much about the world that wouldn't happen if it wasn't for artists, right? Like, I mean, the artistic creative mindset drives everything that's happened, and in terms of culture and mythology and the way we construct our societies, and like obvious like artists as a class provide a lot of value to the species. But any individual artist, I think, is, if they're being honest with themselves, is always struggling with like, look, I'm sitting in my room making comics or whatever, am I really helping? And that's where it's like we observe from a distance, right? We're kind of like on the outside, we're observing, we're commenting on, and that, like, that's our function in society. And that could be really obnoxious and annoying, right? Like, just get over here and actually like save someone's life or something, you know, just quit talking about it. And even the disdain here of like, why are they so helpful? Well, probably grant money, which means like they're not actually being helpful. Just some institution gave them some money, and then they probably had to fill out a grant application that justified it along some kind of like, oh, we're helping clean up the neighborhood or whatever. Like if you've seen artist grant applications, a lot of them are for those kinds of things, like public service art or whatever. So I think like Will Dinski's taking some shots at, obviously as an artist himself, he's taking some shots at himself and everyone else to think about what is our function and are you doing your art responsibly, and then also just being like, well, whatever, you can't really think about it too much, do another one, it's fun. So there's like some utility in that as well. So that was fun. I enjoyed that story. They say the end, what? The end? Huh? I mean, thank you. So there's a sense to me, because this is so much about this character and we have all the other people in the club, I feel like there's more to this. Here's another one of the Andrew White pieces. I really enjoyed this one, so I'll read it here. It says, a drawing of some cornflowers, a drawing of my memory of some cornflowers, a question about how well I remember the cornflowers, a path I walk as I try to return to the actual cornflowers, a cornflower, a question about whether I've ever seen a cornflower, other questions, other memories. This is really interesting to me. I keep talking about, and I think Andrew White was the first person where I noticed this, and it took me a while to come up with the term for it, but Andrew White is in a category of artists that I say are bringing art school to comics. And one of the things that I mean about that is that his influences are coming from fine art world, like Yoko Ono's concept art is a big influence. This very much reminds me of like a Joseph Kosuth piece where you're talking almost philosophically about how language works or how memory and mind works. It also reminds me of like a Bernard and Hilda Becker or John Baldessari or someone like that have kind of like a collector's instinct. Also speaks to like the idea of categories, how do you categorize things? It's like these are 6 type of cornflowers and then there's other questions and other memories. So maybe he's like, reading some theory, some Foucault or something like that. I don't know, but it's all the type of stuff that like you wouldn't get unless someone's gone to art school, I don't think, or be interested in the fine arts rather than someone like Dan Clowes or Chris Ware who loves comics and goes to art school for skills and then gets pissed off and comes back to comics. This is someone who's absorbing kind of the conceptual end of the fine art world and putting them in comics, but also someone who's very committed to the language of comics and is doing some really phenomenally interesting formal things, like here, just thinking, not thinking, blank, but the visual idea of the word balloon existing in your head and then you trying to get it out by speaking, like getting the thought out of your head. So putting the icon that represents speech inside of the head, I find interesting. I'm not quite sure what to make of all the like use of white and black. Like there's kind of these rhythms in Andrew White's stuff that is like musical and poetic, and I think that's what it's supposed to be, so I don't feel the need to interpret it. It's just kind of rhythmic, like this is about all I need to understand it, but this adds to the, I don't know, kind of vibe of the thing. Also, I've noticed that Andrew White, when we're talking about production, Andrew White really understands the ins and outs of production, and even Sean Knickerbocker is making the recommendation that if you're going to work with tones and black and white, that you do them separately, because then you can prepare them separately, which we have videos on as well. But you can always tell in Andrew White's stuff that he's a real master of production himself and pulls off a number of production tricks that add to the meaning of his works. So that's something I also appreciate about his work. And you get that right here with these perfect, clean, crisp, like razor thin lines of his pen work, and then this, what looks like maybe erased pencil work behind it. Some mediums that maybe wouldn't sit well together, or wouldn't scan well together, or reproduce together. These artists are getting savvy enough to separate them out and not worried about the original art, but thinking about the print in the book as the thing that we're headed towards. So whatever you need to do to get to that, do that, rather than to make sure it all winds up on one piece as a sellable piece. Lesson I'm continually learning. Then we get another Andrew Greenstone. We get a break from the story about the survivor of the Squid Game type of scenario, and this is just a one-off story about a zoo We get some keepers that are working at the zoo, and then we get some kids who sneak. By the way, look at these renderings here. There's kind of some Craig Thompson Blutch fluidity with the line work. There's some other artists that this makes me think of in terms of like the actual forms themselves, but there's some real beautiful brushwork going on in these images. But you have this couple who sneaks into the park to have sex on top of a turtle, not because they like turtles, but because it's just kinky and dangerous, and or tortoise, I should say. And then they get basically attacked by the titular lemur man, whose job is to turn people into animals, because apparently that's how zoos get animals. So a strange little horror story in this one, which is really well illustrated and kind of fun, kind of different vibes than the rest of it. And then another new edition, Silk Stockings by Brian Canini. This one seems more autobiographical, but there's not much like exposition in captions, so it reads pretty well as just like a one-off story. But basically a pretty standard story about a kid playing hide and seek, getting a peek at some sexy lady and having a sexual kind of arousal awakening a little bit too early. Also a story about a family that doesn't have as much as their friends, and the impact that has on the relationship of the parents in the poorer family, to basically have really wealthy friends that have become really wealthy. So again, really down to earth kind of concerns. Some more Andrew White stuff, and then some really nice bios about all the artists, tell what they've done, to kind of tell where you can get a hold of them. All the kind of information that when I'm reading anthologies, I'm like, man, I wish they would give me this, you know. I know, oh, he has a book, Holy Hannah, was released by Uncivilized. Oh, okay, I did like that. So we can go to Tom and be like, hey, what do you got from Will Dinski, you know? Those kind of things like that are really helpful. So I also think Sean Knickerbocker, besides being a phenomenal cartoonist, is putting together an anthology that looks exactly how an anthology should look, kind of provides all the information anthology provide, and again is just making what I think is really exceptional comics and comics anthology. So please, please, please go support the Rust Belt Review. It's great stuff, and please watch, you know, if you need more convincing, watch the other videos that have come out and that will be coming out about this series, because it's great stuff. If you enjoy what we're doing here on the channel and want to support us, there's two ways to do that. The first one is through our Patreon. We have 2 different tiers of engagement on the Patreon. At the first one, you get early access to our videos. At the second tier, you will get exclusive access to previews of the books that Sean and I are drawing currently, as well as the ability to participate in our ongoing webcomic experiment, Prane Day, where you can help determine what happens next in the story. We really appreciate that support. We use the money for that to buy the books that we review, so we just put those funds back into other people's pockets to try and keep supporting the medium that we love and believe in. So we really appreciate that help. If you want to support us living the line ourselves, the best thing to do is to support what Sean's doing with Living the Line Publishing. So we'll go ahead and take a look at one of his projects now. Sala Niyalo, Path of the Shades by Clarence Doss is a really cool ongoing project that Living the Line will be producing. Clarence is a PhD student from Fiji who's studying the myths of Fiji for his doctoral thesis. And part of that study project is that he's producing these comics. They're kind of like Hellboy, where there's these little short stories that capture all of these different mythologies. But then he's using that to wrap the project into his doctoral thesis and then provide educational material where people can come to these comics. You know, they don't have to read his PhD thesis. They can come to the comics and get a more consumable version of the mythology of Fiji. Thanks for following along. Take it away, Jack.
You want to see all these books? Smash that subscribe button and the like button and the bell, and then you